The rain fell in steady sheets, drumming against the rusted tin roof of the old community center. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and stale coffee. A small crowd, mostly locals in worn jackets and muddy boots, gathered around folding tables cluttered with flyers and donation jars. The event was a fundraiser for the town's crumbling Veterans Memorial, a weathered stone slab etched with names half forgotten by the younger generation. At the edge of the room, unnoticed by most, stood Elias Kane, a man in his late 60s with a stooped posture and a faded green army surplus jacket. His hands, calloused and scarred, clutched a chipped mug of black coffee. A frayed patch on his sleeve, barely legible, read U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Elias kept his eyes low, his gray stubble catching the dim light of the flickering fluorescence. A small brass pin shaped like a castle, the Corps' insignia, glinted faintly on his collar. To the casual observer, he was just another aging vet, one of many in this small industrial town where the steel mill had long since shut down. But there was something in the way he stood, still, deliberate, like a man who'd learned to carry weight no one else could see. At the front of the room, a young man in his 20s, wearing a pressed blazer and a smirk, tapped a microphone. His name was Dylan Carver, a local reporter with ambitions far beyond the town's borders. He'd organized the fundraiser, mostly to pad his portfolio for a city job. His voice, sharp and performative, cut through the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight," Dylan said, scanning the room with the confidence of someone who thought he owned it. "This memorial's been neglected too long. We're here to honor our veterans, those who actually made a difference. Not just anyone who wore a uniform, mind you. The real heroes. The ones who fought, bled, and built this country." A few in the crowd nodded, but Elias didn't move. His fingers tightened slightly around the mug, the faintest tremor betraying a flicker of emotion. Dylan's eyes landed on him and the reporter's smile tightened. He'd seen Elias around town before, always alone, always quiet, tinkering with broken machines at the community center or fixing the library's leaky pipes for free. To Dylan, Elias was a relic, a man who'd probably spent his service pushing papers or digging ditches, not someone worth mentioning in his carefully curated narrative of real heroes. Dylan continued, his tone growing bolder. "We've got a lot of stories to tell tonight, but let's be honest, not every vet's story is worth telling. Some just did their time and went home. We're here for the ones who went above and beyond." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman in a red coat, sitting near Elias, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "He's talking about guys like Elias, isn't he? Always here, but what did he even do?" Her friend shrugged, glancing at Elias's worn jacket. The castle pin caught her eye, but she dismissed it as some outdated trinket. Elias took a slow sip of his coffee, his face unreadable. But his eyes, sharp and gray as slate, flicked toward Dylan for a moment before returning to the floor. He wasn't here to argue or correct. He was here because the memorial mattered, not for himself but for the names carved into it. Names he hadn't spoken in decades. As the event dragged on, Dylan called up a few veterans to share their stories. A Vietnam-era pilot spoke of dogfights over Hanoi. A Gulf War medic recounted saving lives under fire. Each story drew claps and cheers, and Dylan basked in the attention, framing himself as the evening's hero for giving them a stage. But when he asked for more volunteers, no one stepped forward. The room grew quiet, the rain outside filling the silence. Dylan's gaze settled on Elias again, this time with a glint of mischief. "Hey, old-timer," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been standing there all night looking like you've got a story. Corps of Engineers, right? Built some bridges, maybe swept a few floors? Come on, share something. Or is it just not worth our time?" The crowd chuckled nervously. Elias didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened and the mug in his hand stopped moving. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he set the mug on the table beside him, the faint clink echoing in the quiet. He straightened, his stooped posture unfolding into something solid, unyielding. The faintest hint of a scar peeked out from under his collar, a jagged line that hadn't come from any accident. "I'm not much for speeches," Elias said, his voice low and gravelly like stones grinding together. "But if you're asking about bridges, I built a few. And I blew a few up too." The crowd shifted, unsure whether to laugh or listen. Dylan, sensing an opportunity to keep the spotlight, pressed harder. "Blew up bridges? Come on, man, give us something real. You're telling me you've got some secret war story? What, were you saving the world behind a desk?" A few laughs broke out, but they died quickly. Elias's eyes locked onto Dylan's, and for the first time, the reporter faltered. There was something in that gaze, Not anger, not pride, but a weight that made the air feel heavier. Elias reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded photograph, its edges worn and creased. He held it for a moment, his thumb brushing over it, then slipped it back without a word. "You want a story?" Elias said, his voice steady but laced with something sharp. "Be careful what you ask for, kid. Some stories don't fit on a stage." The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Dylan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door at the back of the community center swung open with a bang. Two men in dark overcoats stepped inside, their boots leaving wet prints on the floor. They weren't locals. Their faces were hard, professional, and their eyes scanned the room with purpose. Behind them, the headlights of a black SUV cut through the rain, idling in the parking lot. One of the men, tall with a shaved head and a faint scar across his cheek, spoke in a clipped tone. "Elias Kane?" Elias turned, his expression unreadable. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. The man gestured toward the door. "We need to talk. Now." The crowd parted as Elias walked toward them, his steps measured, his limp barely noticeable now. Dylan stood frozen, the microphone still in his hand, his smirk gone. The woman in the red coat whispered to her friend, "Who is he?" As Elias reached the door, he paused and glanced back at the crowd, not at Dylan but at the donation jar for the memorial. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single dog tag, its surface scratched but gleaming, and dropped it into the jar. The clink echoed like a gunshot. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain with the two men. The SUV's engine roared to life, and its taillights vanished into the night. Inside, the crowd erupted into whispers. Dylan fumbled with the microphone, trying to regain control, but no one was listening. The woman in the red coat picked up the dog tag from the jar, her hands trembling. It wasn't just any tag. Etched into the metal, alongside Elias's name, was a single word: Raven. Who is Elias Kane? What bridges did he build and destroy? And why did those men come for him? Share your thoughts in the comments. Who's the quiet hero in your life, the one who never asks for recognition but deserves it? Hit that subscribe button to find out what happens next. Some stories don't end, they just wait for the right moment to be told. The rain hadn't let up, turning the narrow streets of the town into slick, reflective ribbons under the streetlights. Inside the community center, the crowd buzzed with speculation, their voices a low hum over the clatter of folding chairs being stacked. Dylan Carver, the reporter, stood near the donation jar, his face pale as he stared at the dog tag Elias Kane had left behind. The word Raven etched into the metal seemed to burn into his mind. He'd heard it before, whispers in military history forums, vague references in declassified files he'd skimmed for a story he never finished. It wasn't just a name. It was a legend tied to operations so classified they were barely acknowledged even decades later. Outside, Elias sat in the back of the black SUV, its tinted windows shielding him from the world. The two men in overcoats occupied the front seats, their silence heavy. The driver, the one with the scarred cheek, glanced at Elias in the rearview mirror. "You didn't have to show up at that fundraiser, Raven," he said, his voice low but respectful. "You knew it'd stir things up." Elias leaned back, his faded jacket creaking against the leather seat. "Wasn't there for me," he said, his gravelly voice steady. "The memorial's falling apart. Those names deserve better." The second man, shorter with wire-rimmed glasses and a tablet glowing in his lap, tapped the screen. "Your file's been reactivated, Kane. Pentagon's orders. They need you for something delicate. Operation Iron Veil. You're the only one left who knows the layout." Elias's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. His fingers brushed the pocket where the worn photograph rested. A faded image of a young soldier, no older than 20, standing beside a half-built bridge in a desert, the horizon smoldering with distant explosions. The soldier wasn't him. It was someone else, someone whose name was carved on that memorial back in town. Back at the community center, Dylan's journalistic instincts kicked in. He slipped the dog tag into his pocket, ignoring the protests of the woman in the red coat. "I'll return it," he lied, already pulling out his phone to search for Raven. The results were sparse: redacted documents, grainy photos from the 80s, and a single mention of a covert unit tied to the Army Corps of Engineers. The unit, codenamed Raven, wasn't just about building bridges. They demolished enemy strongholds, rigged entire valleys to collapse, and vanished without a trace. One name kept surfacing: Elias Kane, a man credited with saving thousands of lives in operations no one dared speak of. Dylan's heart raced. He'd mocked a ghost, a man whose past could fill books no one was allowed to read. but his ambition overpowered his guilt. If he could break this story, it'd be his ticket out of this dead-end town. He started typing a post on X, his fingers flying. Just met a vet who might be a legend. Codename Raven. Anyone know more? Hashtag military history, hashtag unsung heroes. Within minutes the post gained traction. Replies flooded in, veterans, historians, even a few anonymous accounts with cryptic warnings. Leave Raven alone. Some secrets stay buried for a reason. One user, with a profile picture of a castle insignia, posted a single line. Check the archives. Operation Iron Veil. But be careful what you dig up. Dylan's stomach twisted. He glanced at the dog tag, its weight heavier now. Back at the community center, the crowd was thinning, but the woman in the red coat hadn't left. She approached Dylan, her eyes sharp. You don't know what you're messing with, she said. Elias fixed my father's tractor last year. Never said a word about himself. But my dad recognized that pin. Said men like Elias don't just build things, they make sure the right things fall. Meanwhile, the SUV pulled into an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, its windows boarded up and its lot overgrown with weeds. Inside, a makeshift command center hummed with activity, laptops, maps and a satellite feed flickering on a screen. A woman in a crisp suit, her hair pulled back tightly, greeted Elias with a nod. Colonel Kane, she said, her tone formal but warm. We didn't think you'd come. Not a colonel anymore, Elias replied, his voice flat. He glanced at the screen, which showed a grainy image of a dam in a war-torn region, its structure cracked and unstable. Iron Veil. Thought that was buried. It was, the woman said. Until someone started asking questions. We need you to go back. One last time. Elias's hand drifted to the photograph in his pocket. The soldier in it, his son, had died during Iron Veil, protecting a bridge Elias had built under fire. The mission had saved a city, but it cost him everything. He looked at the woman, his gray eyes unyielding. You don't need me. You need Raven. And he's been gone a long time. The woman leaned forward, her voice low. Raven's the only one who can stop this. If that dam goes, thousands die. You built it. You know its weaknesses. Elias didn't answer. He stepped outside, the rain soaking his jacket as he stared into the night. The dog tag was gone, but he didn't need it. The weight of his past was enough. Back in town, Dylan's post was going viral, drawing eyes to a man who'd spent decades avoiding them. And somewhere, in a dark corner of the internet, a file labeled Raven flickered to life, its secrets about to spill. What is Operation Iron Veil? Why does the Pentagon need Elias now? And what will Dylan uncover in his search for the truth? Drop your theories in the comments. Who's the unsung hero in your life, the one who carries their past in silence? Subscribe to see how this story unfolds. Some truths are worth fighting for. The warehouse was a cocoon of shadows, its walls echoing with the hum of generators and the faint crackle of radios. Elias Kane stood before the satellite feed, the grainy image of the dam flickering on the screen. Its cracked concrete face loomed like a ghost from his past, a relic of Operation Iron Veil, a mission that had cost him his son, Daniel, and left scars deeper than the one on his neck. The woman in the suit, Colonel Harper, watched him closely, her eyes searching for the man once known as Raven. The rain outside pounded harder, a relentless drumbeat matching the tension in the room. You don't have to do this, Elias, Harper said, her voice softer now. We can send someone else. But no one knows that dam like you. You built it under fire. You rigged it to hold when everyone said it would fall. Elias's gaze didn't waver from the screen. And it cost me everything, he said, his voice a low rumble. His hand rested on the photograph in his pocket, the edges worn smooth from years of quiet grief. Daniel died because I made it hold. You think I want to go back? Harper didn't flinch. I think you want to make sure no one else dies because it fails. In town, Dylan Carver hunched over his laptop in his cramped apartment, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. His ex-post about Raven had exploded, racking up thousands of shares. The replies were a mix of awe, skepticism, and cryptic warnings. One message from an account with no profile picture stood out. Iron Veil wasn't just a mission. It was a sacrifice. Leave it alone or you'll regret it. Attached was a grainy scan of a declassified report, stamped 1987. It mentioned a dam in a war zone, a small team of engineers and a single name, Elias Kane. The report hinted at a cover-up, civilian lives saved, but at a cost the military buried deep. Dylan's hands shook as he typed a new post. Found proof. Elias Kane, codename Raven, saved a city during Operation Iron Veil. But something went wrong. Who knows more? Hashtag Raven revealed he didn't notice the unmarked car parked across the street, its driver watching his window. Back at the warehouse, Elias traced a finger along the dam's image, his mind pulling him back to that night in '87. Gunfire in the distance, the stench of diesel, Daniel's voice shouting over the radio, "Hold the line, Dad. We've got this." The bridge had held, diverting enemy forces and saving thousands. But a sniper's bullet found Daniel, and Elias carried his body home. Raven died that night too, buried under a civilian life of fixing pipes and mending fences. Harper slid a folder across the table, its cover marked classified. "The dam's failing," she said. "Insurgents know its weaknesses. Figos, the valley floods. Entire villages, gone. We need you to reinforce it or rig it to blow clean. Your call." Elias opened the folder, his eyes scanning blueprints he'd drawn decades ago. His own handwriting stared back, a map of every bolt and beam. He closed it and looked at Harper. "One condition. The memorial in town gets funded. Every name on it gets remembered." Harper nodded. "Done." The next morning the town woke to news that shook its core. A viral video, posted anonymously, showed footage from 1987. Elias Kane, younger but unmistakable, leading a team through a war zone, building a dam under relentless fire. The video ended with a dedication, "To Daniel Kane and the unsung heroes of Iron Vale." Dylan watched it on his phone, his throat tight. The dog tag sat on his desk, a silent rebuke. He posted one last update, "I was wrong about Elias Kane. He's a hero. So was his son. Hashtag honor the silent." By noon, donations poured in for the Veterans Memorial, enough to rebuild it and more. A new plaque was commissioned with Daniel Kane's name at the top. Elias, already en route to a classified airstrip, didn't see the news. He didn't need to. The photograph in his pocket was enough. A reminder of why he'd built, why he'd fought, and why he'd go back one last time. As the plane lifted off, Elias looked out at the shrinking town below. The rain had stopped and the memorial's stone gleamed in the sunlight. He closed his eyes, Daniel's voice echoing in his mind, "Hold the line, Dad." In the weeks that followed, the dam was secured, though no news outlet reported it. Elias returned quietly, slipping back into his routine of fixing leaks and tinkering with machines. But the town had changed. The memorial stood tall, its new plaque drawing visitors from across the state. Dylan, humbled, left for the city but vowed to tell stories that mattered, starting with the unsung. The woman in the red coat placed a wreath at the memorial, whispering, "Thank you, Elias." And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the community center, a faded jacket hung on a chair, its castle pin catching the light. Elias Kane's story reminds us, heroes don't always shout their deeds. Who's the quiet hero in your life? Share their story in the comments. Subscribe to keep their legacies alive. Some bridges hold forever.